Hi everyone, I'm here today with Serena, aka Born Vegan. You should definitely check out her channel. They're super underrated, honestly. I found it like a couple months ago, and I think the first video I watched was your discussion on the whole like controversial comparisons. So the Holocaust comparison, and I just found that it was like very balanced and refreshing to hear, because like I was just like caught up in these two extremes where one side is like, you can never use these terms, this is horrible and oppressive and offensive and we shouldn't use them ever, and then there's the other side that's like just using them so much, just value, and it's like too much. So I highly recommend checking out that video of yours. But if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and like what your channel's about.
Okay. So yeah, I'm Serena, born vegan. Channel name kind of speaks for itself. I was raised vegan from birth. So that's my goal, has kind of been to show people that that's possible. You can raise kids vegan. It's not, I'm not brainwashed. I'm an adult. I still am vegan. I'm physically functioning. It didn't, make me have a small brain and like die or whatever the bizarre things that people say. So that's kind of the general theme. But then having grown up vegan, I have also like been involved in the movement, protests, different conferences, learning different theories and ideologies, hearing different perspectives like my entire life. So some of my channel also is making videos like how I view conflicts and kind of my perspective on that. So I do, yeah, all of the above.
Yeah, that's super cool. Like I think we're the same age. I'm 27.
Yep, just turned 27.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's cool because like I've been vegan for almost 8 years now.
Okay.
Which I feel like is a long time, like, but then someone who's been vegan their whole life, I feel like you have so much more insight, like going through, you probably have like phases of your advocacy. So that was the first question I wanted to ask you, was like, how has your activism evolved over the years? And like, what did you consider was effective activism then, and like what do you consider is effective now?
Yeah, it's a great question. My views have definitely evolved a lot. Yeah, spot on with the phases. I've had all those. I mean, growing up, I was very much like, we're vegan, we're all in the same, even when I was little and I didn't even know a ton of vegans, like someone even being vegetarian to me was like, oh, like, yeah, we're part of the same movement. You care about animals too. Like, we're going to be allies. And I think it was somewhere around high school where I started meeting more vegans my age, and the movement was growing a little bit more, and I started to feel like, okay, like I'm saying this stuff, like, okay, vegetarians aren't like quite as part of this movement as I kind of used to think they were. We kind of see things differently. And so that's when I kind of started to identify like just more specifically with the vegan movement, the animal rights movement, and kind of became more also abolitionist at that time, because one of the conferences I grew up going to had a lot of people that were much more on the side of like, we don't want to do welfare reform. We're like we're promoting veganism and the abolition of all using animals. There's no okay way to use animals. And so I'd say that was kind of that was what I was largely surrounded with. So when I got to high school and then going into college and kind of started reading things for myself, rather than, because like as a kid, I didn't even think about theory. It was just like, oh, my parents took me to a circus protest. Cool, we're at a circus protest. Oh, like, you're not thinking about that. You're not like, at least I wasn't. And the movement felt a lot smaller then too to me. So there wasn't as much, there was still disagreement for sure. but it just felt like in my mind, if you were vegan, we were all on the same page. And then high school comes along and I start kind of thinking more for myself. And at that time, I kind of identified that there were kind of a split or two sides. There was the more welfarist side, the large organizations, the groups, and the people that were talking a lot about like Proposition 2 or bigger cages for chickens in factory farms, like these more incremental policy changes that they were kind of working on and pushing. And I, again, happened to be surrounded by people that were bothered by vegans working for Happy Meat or promoting more humane standards. And we're like, no, we reject that. We want to get rid of all of that. And so that was kind of the first phase I had. And I naively thought like that everyone that was, you know, abolitionist or not on the welfare side was all on the same page. That was a rude awakening when I realized there were a million perspectives within even, you know, that perspective. And then at some point in probably around 2014 now, I think, I was in college and I started reading a lot of Gary Francione's work, for people that are familiar with him. And he kind of coined the term the abolitionist approach. And I became pretty obsessed with his theory. And so I went from like just being against sort of welfare reform to, you know, being against circus protests, being against single issue campaigns. Like the only way to do activism is vegan advocacy, have a table, give out some vegan samples, vegan literature. Veganism is the moral baseline. Like that's all I'm part of. Everything else, like I'm not even part of that. And I was in that space for like a little while. And I never fully like 100% agreed with all of it. Like I always had some questions about the idea of single issue campaigns, or like, isn't there a place for some like policy changes as long as they're done in a certain way? And, but I didn't really, I was kind of just obsessed with that theory, so I didn't really say much about that. And then I kind of got pretty turned off of some of the online behaviors in that community. I just decided that was not, I still liked the ideas a lot, but I was just like, this is kind of toxic. There's a lot of attacking and blocking and unfriending over like things that I thought were kind of minutia. And then I spent the year after I graduated from college working with a nonprofit filmmaking and still very abolitionist vegan organization. And I love their work and we have a lot in common. But then, you know, we kind of had some differences that, again, I thought in the scheme of things were maybe fairly small minutia, but were big enough that, you know, it wasn't a good fit anymore. And that was also a pretty rude awakening for me. And I kind of started to feel like there was just a lot of gatekeeping on the super abolitionist side, and that it wasn't always helpful and always productive. And there was a lot of like, how far out do we go? Like, oh, you've talked with this person who talks with this person who promotes this problematic idea. Like where, you know, and that just really started to seem problematic to me. And so I kind of started to swing back the other direction of like, you know, there's no one right way to do activism. There's lots of different approaches. So yeah, long story short, I guess I would say, like, I still consider myself pretty abolitionist, and I still agree with a lot of those ideas. I still personally like to promote veganism. That's where I feel most called. But I think different people have different strengths, and different people have different skills and things that they're passionate about. So like, I definitely am not against like circus protests or single issue campaigns anymore, especially ones that are focused on abolition. Like in my hometown, a lot of local activists got all circuses completely banned from our county. So like, it's an, you know, a single issue, but an abolitionist single issue, because like literally no animal circuses can perform here ever. That's awesome. And I think that's great. Yeah. So like I just kind of choose what I want to focus on, and I'm spending a lot less time criticizing other people and what they want to focus on, unless I think it's like truly problematic or undermining veganism.
Yes, so that was brilliantly put, because
Thank you.
I feel like we focus so much on arguing about like the strategies and tactics, and I find myself like taking like a middle ground approach regarding the how,
Mm-hmm.
but when it comes to the message, like the what or whatever, that's what I think I don't take a middle ground position on, because like I'm an abolitionist. So like I don't think that, I think there are many different ways to approach activism, but I don't think that like watering down the message, like promoting reducitarianism, is a different approach. I think it's a different goal. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Totally agree.
But before we get into like the themes that I have in my notes here, I
Uh-huh.
guess I can briefly go over like my evolution.
Okay.
So I went vegan in college. Like the summer before college, my parents told me to watch Forks Over Knives. And I was like, okay, because my dad had high cholesterol and they had watched that film and they decided to go plant-based. And of course my dad's cholesterol like plummeted. And so I watched it and I was like shocked that I just had no idea. Like all of this information was new to me. I always thought that meat was healthy. Like I worked at a sub shop and it was called Jersey Mike's. They bragged about like the quality of their meat. It's so much better than Subway. And so like I bought into that thinking that I was eating healthy, but I was eating like carcinogenic processed meat all the time. And I was like horrified.
Uh-huh.
So I came at it actually through the health angle. And then I got to college and I joined a club on campus. It was called Speak Out for Species. And I ended up meeting my best friend there, and like we kept going back to the meetings, and because they had cookies. And they would do like a lot of film screenings, events, and I started learning about like the environmental issues with animal agriculture and like the ethical issues. And it all kind of coincided with my angry atheist phase. Like, oh, logic and reason and science and it all like kind of fit together with veganism, because obviously veganism makes sense logically. So I was never like I was never like an apologist vegan. I always had like a firm stance.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of like went through different phases of, okay, maybe this is like a more effective approach, promoting like meatless Mondays, because I read Nick Cooney's books about like change of heart and veganomics, about the foot in the door technique and all that. And so I kind of bought into that for a little while, despite always having like my end goal is like abolition. But I was like, oh, this is the most effective way. And it was really pushed on us by all these welfare, like vegan organizations, that promoting reducitarianism is like the most effective messaging. And then I ended up reading a book called, it was by Casey Taft. I think it was like,
Yep.
do you know what was the name of the book?
It was kind of like a counter to Nick Cooney's book.
Yeah,
but...
yeah. Sorry, it's not coming to me right now, but it was like a clinical psychologist perspective arguing that this is actually confusing people because it's such a conflicting message that we have. Like, if you compare it to other social justice movements, no other social justice movement is using this tactic. Mm-hmm. It's just bizarre. Like, why are we compromising up front? And the other thing was like, reducitarians and vegetarians, if they're the ones like driving the demand for plant-based meats and this whole industry or whatever, then like let them promote vegetarianism and reducitarianism. I'm
Mm-hmm.
vegan, I'm going to promote veganism.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like where I'm coming from.
That's great. Yeah. Casey Taft's book is awesome. I have a copy of it. Can't remember the name either, but
Yeah. Sorry, Casey Taft. Okay, I'm gonna pull up my notes here just to see. Okay, so the first thing was this idea of gatekeeping.
mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on what you consider activism, if you consider advocacy to be a form of activism, or if you like distinguish those two things. And where do you draw the line at like social media advocacy being activism?
Yeah. Tough one. I think I use the terms activism and advocacy interchangeably, so I don't know if there's a distinction there. I've used them interchangeably. And yeah, it's the social media thing. Like, I tend to take a pretty broad approach now of like, I think anything that's planting seeds, you know, you never know who you're going to influence. And I just know so many people at this point who like, they repeatedly just posted pictures of their food. And like, they had friends who were like, wow, I thought vegan food was gross, but like, I see your pictures all the time. And like, that makes me think maybe I could try it, or, you know, just simple things like that. And I also like to do that because I just feel really compelled to empower people, and like I want individuals to feel empowered. And I think when we realize how many people we touch every day with our examples that we're setting, just us living our lives, I'm inclined to sort of call all of that like some form of activism and making a difference. But so I don't, you know, I'm hesitant on like gatekeeping that and being like, oh, what you're doing is not activism. That said, like social media, yeah, I definitely, it's definitely like, okay, you're posting shirtless pictures of you eating fruit and you think that's great activism. Like, I definitely hope that that's reaching some people. And I don't discount, like it probably is. Like when I hear people say, you know, these people turn me vegan, or they like, I do think social media has the power to reach a lot of people. So I'm hesitant to like also still not call that activism, but I can certainly critique it and say like, wouldn't it be great if you actually wrote a post or shared some facts or statistics or something besides just pictures of you? And then there's the flip side, and this is probably a whole nother discussion of like whether or not the health angle is a good angle in general to come from. Because I mean, and I know a lot of people like you that came in from the health angle, so I'm like hesitant to discount that. But if you are like a vegan animal rights activist, I'm hesitant that like that's the best angle we should be using if we're coming at it like specifically for the animals. But I think like we need the health information out there, like people need to know. But then it's a question of like how many people that go vegan for health or are eating a plant-based diet for health end up making those other connections, or how many people that are going, you know, eating plant-based because they see an influencer that looks fit or pretty and is plant-based. How many of those people that are maybe momentarily inspired by that Instagram post stay that way, or make the connection and get into anti-speciesist, you know, thinking. And honestly, I think there's a lack of research in this area. I think like, I don't really know. So like, I'm hesitant to like make strong statements like this absolutely is a bad thing, or this is absolutely a good thing, because I don't really know, and I don't know even how we measure that, and I don't think the data's there for sure.
Right. That's the biggest thing for me is like, we don't have a lot of data to work with. So to make strong assertions, like it's really just, we're just going off of what we feel.
Mm-hmm.
And like different things work for different people. But as far as like the shirtless pics thing goes, like I think there's a point where, yes, it drives engagement, which is good. But then where it becomes a problem to me is when it crosses over into promoting veganism as like this health diet where you're gonna lose weight and look like this person. Like Freely the Banana Girl. She's an example. Like I think that she often uses this justification for her activism of like, well, I'm bringing all these people to this message or whatever. I'm sharing this message with millions and millions and millions of people. But it's like, you don't know how many of those people are like still vegan to this day. Like all those people who said that they went vegan because of you, some of them genuinely did, but many of them are no longer vegan. And you also have to take into consideration all the women that she influenced negatively in terms of like disordered eating.
Right.
How many people now view veganism as a diet? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She is adamant about the ethics, but I don't know. It's like we can't use metrics like followers and views as evidence of effectiveness.
Right.
So
for sure, I totally agree. And like, yeah, I mean, I think, and that's where like the health thing, I think it's a very complex conversation, because the reality is like a lot of people are selfish and they are choosing to change their diet because they want to look a certain way or they want to feel a certain way or be healthy. And that's why they're doing it. And so it's just, yeah, but you definitely have to take into account like people that you're negatively impacting or people that tried, eating 50 bananas a day or whatever and associated that with veganism and are like, never, because it's just, people that eat 50 bananas a day and have these like weird habits and
yeah. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, it's hard to determine like what is genuine versus performative activism online and like what is considered slacktivism. Like how can we really know? I think that a lot of people like ascribe such bad intentions on these vegan influencers, like they're narcissists, and some of them are, but like I don't know, it's just hard to say.
yeah, definitely. And yeah, like how do we judge? I mean, there's some that I feel like they are handing the truth to us on a platter in front of our face and people still don't want to see it, but but I mean, that's just a few. Like there's lots of them that I think generally, as far as I can tell, probably have good intentions. Yeah, they're probably also making money off of it. And that's something that I've gone back and forth on a lot, because when I was more obsessed with my Gary Francione phase, I was in the mindset of like, I better not get a job working for a nonprofit. I better not make money off of activism because like that's somehow wrong. And then it wasn't until I actually worked with a nonprofit for a year and they were like, what's wrong with being able to dedicate your whole life to this and be able to feed yourself? And I was like, yeah, like what is wrong? And so I like kind of did an about face where I was like, why do I feel guilty about making money and also being able to spend my, like not everyone has like a tenured professor job where they can say whatever they want and do activism on the side while like making a great living. So like I used to fault influencers, I guess, for like getting rich off of activism and like I don't anymore. I don't think you should be getting rich off of it just to get rich off it, but like I don't fault people for making money from it and having, a decent quality of living and people paying them for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And also the whole controversy getting clicks thing. I definitely wanted to talk about that. Part of me understands that that's true. Like, for example, Vegan Gains. Like, would he be as popular if he weren't so abrasive, And the answer is yes, or no, he wouldn't be as popular.
Mm-hmm.
But he has positively influenced people, like lots and lots of people, because he is really skilled at debating on the topic of veganism and nutrition. But like, does that justify the like oppressive, terrible things that he said and promoted, like perpetuating myths about sexual assault, for example, and like the misanthropy and like, I mean, I can forgive some misanthropy, but like he said some pretty outrageous things. And it's like, and with Freely, like the body shaming and denial of systemic racism, those things get clicks and attention and drive people to their pages, which will, I guess, spread the message to more people. But it's like, I don't know, I don't have like I'm not a superhuman computer who can like calculate the utilitarian effects of, I just don't know.
Yeah.
But it feels wrong to me to use that as an argument, like, oh, well, it's for the animals, but like at what cost? And I think that you can be controversial in a way that's not disparaging. And I think Joey Carbstrong does a good job of this. Like he's aggressive and he uses strong language, but I haven't seen him saying anything like horribly misogynistic or racist or like, I don't know. I might have a soft spot for Joey because I just think his background is cool with like ex-gay turned vegan activist. But
yeah. I mean, I feel like what you're asking is tapping into a bigger question of like, I don't know, kind of the philosophical question of like, what just, do the ends justify the means? And I think of that in the context of like all like my years growing up, and like I was never a fan of a lot of PETA's behaviors and tactics, or HSUS, the Humane Society. Those were two groups that I just basically never was affiliated with or did anything with. And I would routinely just have activists say, but they do so much good. And it's really difficult because then you even look at like the Me Too movement in the vegan community, and I don't know, I just find it interesting that like the three male figures in the movement that I criticized their like approach to animal rights and willingness to compromise the animals or be more welfarist and all of that kind of stuff also happen to be like the same three most high profile men that were like kicked out of their organizations for sexual assault. And that a lot of what I think kept them in power for so long was this, but they do so much good claim. And so I don't have an answer to it. It's definitely like just I feel like it has to be on an individual basis. Like, I don't think there's a blanket rule of like, you can't ever say or do this. Like you can't I don't know. And I think we definitely need to take an individual approach and understand people's backgrounds. Like you're saying with Joey, and like I saw people early on in the 2000s. I don't know. Do you know who Howard Lyman is? He's in Cowspiracy. And so he was actually hugely attacked. People don't know this. In the early 2000s, he made like a couple sexist remarks on stage at the animal rights conference one year. And there's like some people that like hold it against him, hold it against him today. And I feel like I'm not saying that your background excuses or doesn't mean you can't be held accountable, but I feel like there is a level where we need to recognize the different generations and backgrounds that people come from before just canceling them or, and like their experiences. I don't know perfectly how to balance that. I don't know how much room we give people and versus, but I'm definitely slower on the edge of like canceling people or just saying like, I definitely am like willing to give people the benefit of the doubt unless they say or do like really problematic or very blatantly problematic things. And I feel like there's generally a pretty like, to me, it seems obvious who has like definitely crossed that line. And I'm not a fan of seeing like all the male vegan influencers just like painted with a broad stroke, because I think there is a big difference and they are behaving quite differently.
Yes.
Like, yeah, I tend to like Joey Carbstrong. I think Earthling Ed is very articulate, and I, you know, and I think like lumping them in with some other people isn't great.
Yeah, and just because they're friends with each other, like, we shouldn't be like, it's guilt by association.
Yep.
To paint them all with the same brush, I think.
And because of my experience with like seeing guilt by association like get out of hand in the past, I'm also very hesitant to like do that myself.
Right. And that actually reminds me, so in my notes, I made this point about Earthling Ed. So I saw a lot of this on Instagram where people are just outraged that he's not using his platform to, you know, denounce white supremacy and talk about other social justice issues. He has, like, it's clear that he did make a post about BLM, for example. He has, like, dropped a few things here and there to let us know that he's, you know, progressive. But I think it's strategic on his part to use his platform the way he's using it to reach a wider audience. And I don't think that we should be demanding of people like how they should be using their platform, as long as they're not using their platform to like actively cause harm and spread like oppressive messaging, then let them just do their thing. Like,
totally agree.
And it's such a double standard. Like, the people who were sharing this petition, like, demand Earthling Ed, speak up on this or whatever. I'm like, okay, but you're demanding like perfection from these vegan activists, and you're demanding that they do activism in the exact way that you want them to do it. But then you don't hold that same standard for other leftists who are eating meat and like promote like speciesist. Like, you are willing to give them all the patience and compassion and like forgiveness for like doing something extremely harmful. And then you turn around and like blast Earthling Ed, who's like not even doing anything wrong. He's just not doing exactly what you want him to be doing. And it's just so weird to me. Like,
totally. I am like with you 100%. I just think there's a big difference between saying harmful things. Like, there's a very big difference between being openly sexist, being openly racist, being openly using your platform to promote white supremacy or promote these things versus not doing anything. And you know, I understand that like not doing things or being silent can be problematic too, but I think it's, especially when you're already an activist, I don't think every activist is required. Like, I don't think intersectionality or a holistic approach requires that you speak on every single topic ever. Like, I think your actions and how you live your life and what you do matter a lot more than like every time there's an event, did you post the right thing? Did you say the right thing? Like, that feels a lot more like virtue signaling to me than like actually creating change.
Right.
And it feels like, and I like wonder, like, what are these petitions going to do? Like, if after there's a petition, he were to come out and say something, then you're just going to say, well, he only did that because of the petition, and hold him like, you know, be like, so it's like, there's no winning. And that's one of the differences, like you said, about like non-vegan leftist communities, is when we're asking them not to serve like meat and dairy at their events, or to, you know, not undermine veganism, we're not even asking them to become animal rights activists. We're not even asking them to become vegan activists. We're saying, can you just not oppress animals right here?
Yes.
Yeah. And when you're coming at vegan activists saying like, make sure you're speaking up about all of these issues, they're not actively oppressing anyone. You're asking them to become an activist on all of your issues. When vegans are asking like non-vegan leftists not to have a barbecue at their protest or whatever, like, I do not expect people that are in other communities or other causes, I never expect them to like become activists on every cause I care about. I just want them, like, at climate events that I've gone to where like we had a local climate march fundraiser, a local group, Sunrise Movement, and it was like at an ice cream shop. They were encouraging people to like go buy ice cream, and they're like, and hey, vegans, there is a vegan option. And I was just like, I don't care if there's a vegan option. Like, you are trying to fund climate activism while paying for the climate to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And killing animals.
Yeah. It just doesn't make any sense. And it really, I think it gives the other side, the anti-intersectionals, ammunition, because they're like, look, intersectional veganism is speciesist.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't, but like these people who are like representing the intersectional veganism movement or whatever are being speciesist. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so back to like Earthling Ed using his platform to solely talk about non-human animals.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's actually effective and necessary, because when you have people like me, and Mexi is a good example, like she does a lot of like leftist content, like total liberation content. I think that if all of us were doing that, there's this huge subset of the population that doesn't identify as leftist.
Right.
Who aren't going, that type of messaging isn't going to resonate with them. So we need people who are trying to appeal to as wide an audience as possible by just focusing on animal rights to get them like in. And then once they're in, people like me who, you know, maybe focus more on politics and just like leftism in general, like might influence them. You know, it's like, we have to have both. We can't all be promoting like total liberation. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, yeah, it gets into a deeper conversation, because I feel like that is what some people want. Like they think, well, and I've seen all these comments in regards to like Seaspiracy recently. Like, the problem with the film is it didn't talk about capitalism. And I'm like, okay, I see what you're saying, but like, do you criticize every environmental film that doesn't talk about capitalism on those same grounds, or are you just criticizing the vegan film for not talking about capitalism? And like, also, I think it's very short-sighted to think that capitalism is the only problem. Like, it is a piece of the problem, but when you care about, you know, speciesism, like, it just, animals have been exploited before capitalism, during capitalism, in every economic system that's ever existed. And it feels very short-sighted to think that that is the one and only root issue, which is kind of what I feel like is behind a lot of the, we have to talk about that, we have to make sure and I think that that's very short-sighted. And if we really want to end animal oppression, we have to have people that are speaking about animals and anti-speciesist work separate from capitalism. So yeah, it's it's complex. And because I feel like there are people that think that like we should all be like, the only solution is everyone being leftist, anti-capitalist, you know, total liberation. But like, I don't know, like, I feel like the thing that I fundamentally cared most about is speciesism. I care about the other things too, and I think we can work towards all of them, but I think it's okay to have people that make food sovereignty their topic. I think it's okay to have people focusing on animal liberation. It's okay to have people focusing on like mass incarceration and I think that's fine. I don't think everyone has to be talking about everything.
Yeah. I talk about like a wide variety of topics because I want to, like, it interests me, and that's what I want to be doing. But on the flip side, there are also people who demand that vegan activism must be apolitical to be effective. And I disagree with that too. Like, I made a video about the vegan bros. I don't know if you were familiar with them at all. But like, they were like, that's a caricature. That's like the extreme opposite end, where like, they're saying that my activism is wrong and ineffective because I am like reaching a niche audience and I should be trying to cast a wider net. But I think that what I'm doing is also important because I think it's important to have people who are speaking to leftists, because there's so many leftists who are like so speciesist, and they need to hear it from someone who is also talking about all the issues they care about.
Yep.
Because if they just hear it from someone else, it might not resonate. But if I'm like bringing in all these analogies and parallels and stuff, it'll click for them. So
totally. I mean, that's why I'm very much like, I've backed away from a lot of the, like, I used to be very critical of lots, like, I've been in those spaces where I was the gatekeeping critical, like, you know, only this type of activism, if you're not doing this, you know, and I've really backed away from that because I think, I think we just don't have the data to say. We can't know in the middle of a movement what actually is the best, the one thing that's going to work. I think that's very naive to think that we can measure that in the middle of trying to make it happen. So I'm very much like, yeah, like we need different stuff. And I'm not going to be that person who's like, you all over there have to be doing activism this way. And so, yeah, like when the vegan bros came out and said that, I was like, okay, like you're being definitely equally as yeah, like really you're gonna say like people shouldn't be doing political stuff, and I think there's a big difference too. I've thought about making a video on this, but I haven't. I don't think I've said this anywhere. A big difference between political and partisan, and I feel like people mix those up, and it's like veganism, I will state that veganism is political, it is not partisan.
Yes.
So
snaps to that, because okay, this is like the perfect example. I worked for Greenpeace, and they were adamant about being nonpartisan because strategically it would be so stupid if they aligned themselves with the Democratic Party, because how could they hold the Democratic administration accountable if they're like promoting their campaign? Like that just doesn't make any sense. So like we should continue to remain nonpartisan. We should never align with like a particular party, but we are political, and it's not veganism is not a conservative ideology. It is inherently a progressive ideology. So naturally, progressive candidates are going to be better, not perfect, but for the environment and for animals than like Trump. So
right. I mean, and part of the reason I say it that way too is because sort of on the flip side, I think veganism and anti-speciesism is still so unpopular that when I look at the things and policies I care about, there is no party. Like both parties are like, I mean, Bernie Sanders and AOC are like great examples. Like they promote like Bernie like wrote the foreword to like a meat loving cookbook or something. And it was like about how much he loves meat, and he totally courts Vermont dairy farmers. And so that's another reason that I say it's like political, but not partisan, because I don't see politicians that are putting forward, like, I feel like I'm having to, like the policies that I want, that I think would support veganism and climate justice and, you know, anti-speciesist work, the Democratic Party is certainly not. There's like no party that's truly supportive of them, unless it's like these really niche, tiny vegan parties that haven't really gone anywhere yet. And I think that's important for people to see that, like, I'm not aligned with any party in that way. I want to focus on policies, whichever party puts them forward. I don't care. I will support whatever the policy is that I want to support. It may end up being more on one side than the other. But right now I see neither side that's putting forward or supporting anything close to the policies that I think we need. Yeah, for sure. I think that it does make sense though to point out that like being a Trump supporter does not align with veganism because of his policies are like horrible for the environment, which is horrible for animals. And I mean, yeah, I'm not a Democrat either. Like
but I'm just saying. And that's like bringing it back to Greenpeace. Like Greenpeace was anti-Trump, but not partisan. They were not a fan of Biden as well. Like they rated all the candidates and none of them passed. None of them got an A+ for their climate policies.
Yep.
But so I wanted to talk about like the individual change versus system change. I think that it's like framed as, it's like this tug of war where people are like, we have to focus on system change, and then other people are like, you know, just solely focusing on like getting individuals to go vegan as if that's enough. And it's like, it's both. Like we need both. So did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely both. I mean, and I have some very interesting personal experiences with this going back to 2014. When I was in college, I did a lot of activism and I got a lot of pushback. It was very interesting to see like things that I never predicted, and all of the things that I feel like have sort of become mainstream leftist or liberal talking points right now were sort of more niche in like 2014, 2015-ish. And I just thought it was like a college campus thing. This is what, you know, people on college campuses that are in our little bubble say. Like, I didn't realize that all these things I was hearing were about to like become mainstream or the norm on the left. But I would do like, I did some tabling and I did pay-per-views, like showing people like slaughter footage and stuff outside of my dining hall. And we, like my little group of activists got like absolutely like attacked for this. And I remember like this one particular conversation I had with someone. Mostly they were like they wrote articles in the school newspaper. They criticized us on Facebook. It was just like all over. But one person, you know, told me like, the problem that we all have is that you're focusing on individual change, not systems change. And this was someone who was not vegan, but considers herself in alignment with it. So literally goes, I support veganism, just not when it's problematic. And I was like, okay, you literally like kill animals on like a small humane farm yourself. You don't support veganism. Like, and so I asked her, because she was going on about how we were promoting individual change and it was extremely neoliberal, and like we're giving away like vegan ice cream samples and milk comes from a grieving mother flyers. So it was like, try some, you know, vegan ice cream and here's why you shouldn't support the dairy industry.
So problematic.
Right. Yeah. Like I'm like, you don't even know the things I could have done. Like this, if you are going to criticize me for this, like, you don't know what I could have done and the other plans I've had in my head. I could have disrupted the dining hall. Like so many things I thought about doing. And so when she said, she's like, you know, you really need to like work with us to promote like institutional change. I looked at her and I was like, what institutional change do you want me supporting here on campus? She goes, well, you know, getting like free range pig meat from the local. And I'm like, that is not in support of like anti-speciesist or vegan advocacy. Like we have, you know, different goals. And she goes, no, I support veganism. I just don't like the way you're doing it. And I was like, what way should I be doing it? I was like, the institutional change that I could see happening would be, how about we get meat banned on campus? Like how, and I was like, somehow I don't think you would like that institutional change as much as individual change. And that's the only institutional change like here on campus that I can really think of that like, you know, really would be in line with anti-speciesist work and not like welfare, anti-factory farming stuff. And we went round in circles and finally she goes, I guess we just have different ideas about what veganism is. And like, we just don't agree on the end goal. And I'm like, shocker. Like, wow, it took us that, like I was telling you that from the beginning of this conversation and you just wanted to go on about my methods. And I feel like that is a lot of what is actually going on, especially when it's coming from non-vegan leftists. They want to pretend that the problem they have with us is that we're focusing on individual change and not institutional change, when the reality is they are only against factory farming and they do not support actual animal liberation, anti-speciesist work. And so that's a nice deflection that allows them to feel better about continuing to eat animals or whatever their non-action is. And so, yeah, it's like, trust me, I support institutional change. And I think actual policies like institutional change needs to happen. Subsidies. We need to stop subsidizing meat and dairy. We need to address the farm bill. We need to have massive, but massive boycotts, like everyone boycott this company or this, all of that. But it's I don't know how you think things are going to change if you're just going to sit here saying we need to call out institutions or we need to call out capitalism and then be unwilling to change anything in your life yourself.
Right. It was, that was brilliant. And I was actually reading this blog article earlier this morning, and one of the quotes was, it was from effectiveactivist.com. They have a guide for how to be an effective activist. But it says behavior change campaigns are often insufficient to completely eradicate social issues. But eradicating social issues is often difficult without large numbers of people making behavior changes. And so it's where are we at right now in the vegan movement? We still have very small numbers. So education and anti-speciesist work is super important if we're gonna get enough people on board with fighting for system change. So it's like you said, her idea of system change was different from yours. So the system change we need individuals to wake up and fight for that system change. And I don't know.
And I think especially when it comes to climate stuff, which is where a lot of these conversations I feel are happening, this is a point I don't see many people making, and it drives me nuts, but there is a huge difference between wanting individuals to change their light bulbs out and wanting individuals to go vegan. Because wanting individuals to change their light bulbs, is it's unfairly sort of putting the pressure on individuals when the problem is the electric grid, the power grid, and the fact that we would prefer power companies and governments to shift to renewables instead of fossil fuels. But where is the comparable when we're talking about people not eating animals? You cannot continue to eat animals. There is no system change on the other end that can make eating animals okay without you being willing to not eat animals. So it's whereas individuals shouldn't have to change their light bulbs. We should be able to just change things on the other side, that institutional change. But I think veganism and eating animals is in such a different category than every other issue we're talking about, because it's something that people are attached to and addicted to and that want to keep doing it. And if everyone wants to keep eating meat, there is no and I think that's again a myth. People think, oh, if we get rid of factory farming, we can have regenerative, humane, they think they can keep eating animal products. And if we focus on the institutions, we can just hold these corporations accountable and make their farming and harvesting practices better. When the reality is, we cannot have the level of people that are currently eating meat continue to eat meat and have it be sustainable in any way. And so I just, I think that a lot of the claims and arguments they're making about institutional change versus individual change make a lot more sense on other issues. And veganism is different because people's behaviors around it are different. And you have to be willing to, at some point, whether it starts with individual change or whether we have institutional change that creates that individual change, at some point, you're going to have to be willing to not eat animals for things to change.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, even with the environmental stuff, I think that sometimes it's also super important to get people to make changes, because they always throw out that quote, like 100 companies are responsible for this 70% of emissions. It's like, okay, yes, but like, where's all this energy going? Like, what are we using this energy for? And then you realize it's like our overconsumption of resources, which is like everything we consume. So like, I think it's also important to make individual changes and stop buying so much, like shop secondhand. And, you know, we do need to change the infrastructure because it's like incredibly difficult. Or driving cars would be another example. Like, I have to drive to work because Denver has incredibly poor public transportation. Mm-hmm. Or if I were to use public transportation, it would take hours out of my day. So it's like, that shouldn't be on me, you know, like that needs to be, the system needs to change to make it easier. But with veganism and with like these other things, it's so easy. Like it's such a simple thing that you do. You just like stop buying this and buy this instead, or just like stop shopping at like fast fashion retail stores. Like it's not that hard.
Yeah, no, it's just like, I mean, and that's why I personally like to focus on individual change. And again, where I think like we need everybody doing different stuff. And I absolutely think institutional change is important, but from my personal experience, I don't think we're going to be able to achieve the institutional changes that I want to see unless and until more people agree with our end goal and agree with animal liberation. And you do that by reaching individual people and changing their mindset and helping them go vegan. So like, that's just personally what I'm drawn to do, because I just meet and see so many people that it's like, they would fight against any institutional change that I want right now. They would be mad if meat prices go up or they can't get their cheap meat and their cheap burger because of subsidies ending, or, you know.
I would say that's problematic and classist.
Yeah. So it's just like, I want to change individual mindsets personally, but I think we need that institutional change. I will support any legislative action that is in the direction that I want, you know, absolutely. And we need both, but I just think so much of the non-vegan leftist and environmentalist communities that bring that up are really just using it as a deflection so that they personally don't have to change their habits. And like, blaming the 100 corporations, blaming that's like, okay, do you actually have a plan? Like, what are we doing to target these 100 corporations? Like, boycotts kind of work sometimes, you know, like that's one way to get corporations to change, but just talking about, don't blame the individual, blame the corporation. And then like, okay, what is blaming the corporation doing?
Right.
Where's that going? How are we fixing things? Like, at least I'm taking an action to try and do something. And that's when I responded to somebody that said something on Seaspiracy on TikTok. I think there's so many critiques of it, and I'm just, most of them are crap. Like, and I was just like, the film, in my view, I don't know if you've seen it or not.
I haven't yet.
Okay. So I'll try to split. But basically, I was like, I don't feel like this film is blaming individuals. They are simply providing something that individuals can do to make a difference. Like, there's a big difference. And I did not view the film as blaming individuals for causing this. They were just like, hey, what's something you can do to make a difference? What's the biggest thing an individual can do? Not eat seafood, you know?
Right.
And that's, things get they're trying to turn them into blaming the individual, when really I'm just saying, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just asking, what can you as an individual do to make a difference? If you're spending all your time like like lobbying and working for legislative change, great. But like, most people are just doing nothing. And so at least not contributing to the problem, again, would be a helpful something.
Right. And since we're like coming up on an hour, I guess just to close, I think that, it's super important, like if we're going to critique other activists and like what they're doing, like if you're not doing anything, like I think that doing something is better than doing nothing. I mean, given that you're not doing something outrageously horrible. But like, I found that during quarantine, I was watching a lot of YouTube videos about like questioning strategies and the vegan movement and stuff like that. And it's great to do that, but I think that you can become so overwhelmed and you're like, oh, like what I'm doing isn't even effective, and you get so down and then you just like don't do anything. And it's like going out and doing something small, like chalking or like spray painting messages or like whatever, is better than like being pissed at Earthling Ed on Instagram. That's just how I feel.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, get out there and do something. I mean, and that's where I'm like, you never know what is gonna reach someone. What, I think, I'll say this. I think that a lot of things can plant seeds, and I have two good friends that personally, like, I've been friends with them for like 7 years in one case, 10 years in the other case, and they both took a very long time to go vegan, and they're both vegan now. And while like I'm not going to stand here and promote incremental, baby steps approaches, and all I've ever told them is vegan information going vegan, I also have seen how it took lots of exposure and different experiences and time. And so, and these are people who like, they never, were super arguing against it. They always seem supportive. It's just like kind of went in one ear and out the other and never really seemed to stick. And then finally, like after enough time and exposure, it did. And I think we can never know what experiences, what things are going to plant seeds. Maybe someone saw a message here and then they saw a meme and then they watched a film and finally they spoke to a vegan. And that's the thing that, ended up helping them go vegan. So you never know what kind of message you're planting or what your chalk design or sticker you stuck somewhere is going to do.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Yeah, and
fun. Good conversation.
To Born Vegan's channel. Watch her video about white veganism because it's 10 out of 10.
Thank you.
And you're like way more active on Instagram than me, so you can plug your Instagram as well.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot. I've been trying to make reels. Very hard because 30 seconds is not a lot of time for nuance or much of anything. But like they're getting a lot more play than any other platform and anything else I've done. So I kind of have been doing that a little bit more than YouTube recently. But I'm still on YouTube, but I still have a lot of video ideas. They're just slow.
Awesome. So I'll just link your Instagram in the bio.
Awesome.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, nah, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no